She signed the divorce papers while still bleeding from a miscarriage. She tore up her pregnancy test and vanished without a trace. 5 years later, she walks back into the courtroom, and the man who destroyed her life is about to lose everything. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about survival, about what happens when the woman everyone broke comes back stronger than anyone imagined. What would you do if your husband slept with your sister, your family turned their backs, and the world tried to silence you? Would you run or would you rise? Stay with me until the end, because the twist you won't see coming will change everything. And hey, if this story hits you right in the heart, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more stories of strength, revenge, and redemption. Let's rise together. A dimly lit hospital bathroom. Madison Harper stood frozen, staring at two objects on the sink: a positive pregnancy test, divorce papers with her husband's signature already dry. Blood dripped down her inner thigh. She was miscarrying. Her hands shook as she picked up a pen. Tears fell onto the signature line as she signed Madison Harper one final time. She picked up the pregnancy test, stared at the two pink lines, then tore it in half. The pieces fell into the bloody sink water. Madison threw clothes into a duffel bag and disappeared down the emergency exit stairs. But this wasn't how it started. 5 years earlier, Madison Harper had been 24, a rising corporate attorney at one of Manhattan's top law firms. Sharp, ambitious, on track to make partner by 30. Her husband, Ethan Harper, was 32, an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. Charismatic, confident, from old Connecticut money. The Harper family had been in banking for 4 generations. They were the picture-perfect power couple. Penthouse in Tribeca, weekend house in the Hamptons, society page regulars. But beneath the surface, cracks had formed. 18 months of trying for a baby had added tension. Madison worked 80-hour weeks. Ethan traveled constantly. The red flags started small. Strange perfume on Ethan's collar. Late-night phone calls behind closed doors. His phone password suddenly changed. Canceled anniversary dinner for an emergency meeting. Madison noticed but pushed it down. She was busy. He was busy. That was marriage in Manhattan, right? On a late Tuesday afternoon, Madison sat exhausted from depositions. She felt nauseous, dizzy. Her assistant brought out crackers, joked about pregnancy. Madison froze. 6 weeks since her last period. She rushed to the pharmacy, bought 3 tests, took them all in the office bathroom. All positive. Madison's face transformed. Pure joy. After 18 months, she was finally pregnant. She texted Ethan, "Coming home early. We need to celebrate. I have the best news." His response came immediately. "Me too. Home by 6. Love you." Madison walked into their apartment at 6:30 with champagne and sparkling cider, a shopping bag with tiny blue booties hidden inside. The apartment was quiet, Ethan's briefcase by the door. She heard laughter from the bedroom, his laugh, and another, female, young, familiar. Madison walked down the hallway, heart pounding. The bedroom door was half open. She saw familiar pink slippers by the bed, the ones she'd bought for her younger sister Ashley last Christmas. Madison pushed the door open. Ethan and Ashley were in bed together. Not scrambling, not guilty, comfortable, like they'd done this 100 times. Ashley saw her first. "Maddie, we were going to tell you." Ethan sat up, looked Madison dead in the eye. "I was going to wait until after the Silverman deal closed, but I guess now's as good a time as any." "How long?" Madison barely whispered. 8 months, Ashley said. "Maddie, I'm so sorry, but we didn't mean for this to happen." 8 months? "Look, we haven't been happy for a while," Ethan said. "You're married to your career. Ashley actually sees me." "I'm pregnant." Silence. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked. "I took 3 tests an hour ago." Ashley started crying. "Maddie, I'm pregnant too. 3 months." Madison's world shattered. The shopping bag fell. The baby booties rolled across the floor. Sharp pain ripped through her abdomen. She doubled over. "No," Madison gasped. "No, no, no." Blood soaked through her dress. Ethan and Ashley scrambled out of bed. Ethan reached for his phone. "Don't touch me." Madison said, stumbling to the bathroom. She locked the door. Blood pooled. Cramping seized her. The unmistakable feeling of loss. She could hear them arguing. "We have to call 911, Ashley panicked. "And tell them what? That I was in bed with her sister when she walked in? The press will crucify us." "She's bleeding, Ethan. She's a lawyer. She'll handle it." Madison called her OBGYN's emergency line. 20 minutes later, EMTs arrived. Madison was taken out on a stretcher. At the hospital, a doctor confirmed spontaneous miscarriage, likely triggered by acute psychological trauma. The baby she'd waited 18 months for was gone. Madison lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling hollowed out. She'd lost her baby because she walked in on her husband with her sister. The next morning would bring more devastation. But in that moment, Madison Harper's old life ended. What came next would test everything she thought she knew about strength, survival, and starting mode. Madison woke alone in her hospital room. No flowers, no concerned husband, just emptiness. The door opened. Ethan entered in a suit carrying a manila envelope. Not comfort, just business. "The doctor said you're cleared to leave this afternoon," Ethan said. "Our baby died," Madison said, her voice hollow. "Maybe it's for the best. We clearly weren't ready." He set the envelope on the bedside table. "Divorce papers. My lawyer drew them up last week. Given the circumstances, it's better to move forward quickly." "Last week? You filed before I even knew about the affair?" "I've been unhappy for months, Madison. Ashley actually sees me, talks to me, makes me feel like I matter." "Ashley is my sister. Ashley is the woman I love," Ethan said coldly. "And she's carrying my child. A child she's actually going to keep." The words cut like glass. "Sign the papers, Madison. Make this easy for everyone." After being discharged, Madison drove straight to her childhood home in Greenwich, Connecticut. Surely her parents would understand. She walked in to find her mother, Caroline, and father, Robert, sitting with Ashley. Ashley was crying. Their mother held her hand. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you what happened," Madison said. "We know, Madison," Caroline said coolly. "Ashley told us everything." "Then you understand why I need your help." "We understand that Ashley is 3 months pregnant and needs family support," Robert said. "I just had a miscarriage because I walked in on my husband in bed with my sister." "Madison, don't be dramatic," Caroline said. "Ashley didn't plan to fall in love with Ethan. These things happen." "Maddie, you were never home," Ashley sobbed. "You made him feel invisible." "So you seduced my husband?" "That's enough," Robert said sternly. "Ashley made a mistake, yes, but she's 22, pregnant, and terrified. You're 24 with your career. You'll bounce back." "Bounce back? Dad, I lost my baby." "And we're sorry about that," Caroline said without real sympathy. "But Ashley's baby is still here. Family comes first. She needs us." "I'm your daughter too." "Then act like it," Robert said coldly. "Sign the papers, be gracious, and move on. The Harper family has connections. If you fight this, you'll be blacklisted from every firm in New York." Madison stared at her parents in disbelief. In 24 hours, she'd lost her husband, her sister, her baby, and now her parents. They'd chosen Ashley. She walked out without another word. 1 week later, Madison hired Victor Cruz, a divorce attorney known for destroying powerful men. Over 3 weeks, they built a devastating case. Ethan had embezzled $2.1 million. Ashley had committed insurance fraud. The Harper family had paid off other mistresses. Madison felt powerful again. She had evidence. She was going to destroy him. Then disaster struck. That night, 2 men en masse broke into her apartment. They took everything: laptop, backup drives, all the evidence. One punched her when she tried to stop them. "Stay down if you know what's good for you," one said. The next day, Victor abandoned her. "The Harper family threatened my daughter," he said. "I can't represent you anymore." Every attorney in Manhattan refused her case. Her bank accounts were frozen. Criminal charges were filed against her: defamation, harassment, stalking. Her lawyer for the criminal case told her the truth. "The Harper family owns the DA. If you don't sign the divorce papers and an NDA, you'll go to jail." Madison was powerless. No evidence, no lawyer, no money, no options. 3 days later, she sat in Ethan's lawyer's office signing away everything. The apartment, her savings, her voice. The NDA meant she could never speak about what really happened. If she violated it, she'd owe $5 million. I lost our baby because of you, Madison said. You lost a pregnancy because you're weak, Ethan replied. Sign the papers. Through tears, Madison signed. That night in her empty apartment, nausea hit. She took another pregnancy test. Positive. She'd been pregnant with twins, lost one, kept one. Madison stared at the test. She could tell Ethan, or she could disappear. She remembered his cruelty, her parents' betrayal. The men who attacked her. Madison tore the pregnancy test in half. The pieces fell into the toilet. She withdrew her last $800, bought a bus ticket to Billings, Montana, and left. No goodbye, no note, no trace. Madison Harper disappeared into the night, carrying a secret that would change everything. 1 week later, Madison sat in the office of Victor Cruz, divorce attorney to Manhattan's powerful and betrayed. His office was on the 55th floor of a midtown building, all dark wood and leather furniture and law degrees from Harvard covering the walls. Victor Cruz was 52 years old, silver-haired, sharp as a knife. He'd built his reputation destroying powerful men in divorce court. When wives of Wall Street titans needed someone to fight dirty, they called Victor. Tell me everything, Victor said, pouring her coffee from an expensive-looking carafe. Don't leave anything out. Madison told him the whole story. The affair, the pregnancy, the miscarriage, her family siding with Ashley. By the end, Victor's expression had gone from professional interest to barely contained rage. That son of a bitch, Victor said quietly. Pardon my language, but what kind of man does that to his wife? So you'll take my case? Madison asked, hope flickering for the first time in days. Oh, I'll take your case, Victor said. And by the time I'm done with Ethan Harper, he'll wish he'd never been born. Madison, I'm going to destroy him. Over the next 3 weeks, Victor and his team of investigators built a case that was absolutely damning. They discovered that Ethan had embezzled $2.1 million from Goldman Sachs over the past year, funneling it through shell companies to fund a secret apartment for Ashley in Brooklyn. A love nest paid for with stolen money. They found that Ashley had been on Madison's health insurance when she got pregnant, committing insurance fraud by using coverage she wasn't entitled to. They uncovered 3 other women who'd been involved with Ethan during his marriage to Madison, women his family had paid off with NDAs and settlements to keep quiet. They found evidence that the Harper family had a long history of covering up scandals, bribing journalists, paying off mistresses, making problems disappear with money. Madison felt powerful for the first time since finding them in bed together. She had evidence. She had a fighter in her corner. She was going to make Ethan pay for everything he'd done. With this, Victor said during a strategy session in his office, laying out documents across his conference table, we can get him disbarred from trading. He'll likely face criminal charges for the embezzlement. You'll get the apartment, your full share of marital assets, and he'll be toxic in the financial world. No firm will touch him after we're done. When do we file? Madison asked, studying the evidence with satisfaction. Monday morning, Victor said with a sharp smile. His firm will drop him by noon. I'll make sure of it. I have contacts at Goldman. They'll want him gone before the story breaks. For the first time since the miscarriage, Madison smiled, a real smile. She was going to win. She was going to make them all pay. That night, Madison was in her apartment packing all the evidence into her safe, organizing everything methodically the way she'd been trained to do in law school. Every document labeled, every photo cataloged, every piece of evidence carefully preserved. Someone knocked on the door. She checked the peephole out of habit. A man stood there in a delivery uniform holding a clipboard, Amazon Prime logo on his shirt. She was expecting a package anyway. She opened the door. The man in the Amazon uniform shoved her hard, sending her stumbling backward into her apartment. A second man in a ski mask pushed in behind him. Where is it? The first man demanded, his voice muffled by the mask. Where's the evidence? Madison's blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about. The second man backhanded her across the face. Her head snapped to the side, pain exploding across her cheek. She tasted blood. Don't play stupid, he said. The evidence against Harper. Where is it? They tore through her apartment like a tornado. One of them found her laptop on the coffee table and stuffed it into a bag. The other found her backup drives in her desk drawer. They ransacked her files, taking folders, papers, everything. When Madison tried to stop them, tried to grab her laptop back, one of them punched her hard in the face. She went down, hitting the hardwood floor with brutal force. Blood poured from her nose. "Stay down if you know what's good for you," the first man said, standing over her. "And keep your mouth shut about the Harpers if you want to keep breathing." They left with everything. Her laptop, her backup drives, her file folders, all the evidence Victor had carefully compiled over 3 weeks. Gone. Madison lay on the floor of her apartment, blood streaming from her nose, and realized exactly how powerful and dangerous the Harper family really was. The next day, Madison showed up at Victor's office with a black eye, a split lip, and bruises around her throat from where one of them had grabbed her. Victor took one look at her and his face went pale. "Madison, what happened?" "They broke into my apartment," Madison said, her voice shaky. "Two men. They took everything. The laptop, the drives, all the files, everything." Victor's face went from pale to gray. He sat down heavily in his chair. "Victor, you have copies, right?" Madison asked. "You made backups?" Victor didn't answer for a long moment. When he finally spoke, he wouldn't look at her. "Madison," Victor said quietly, "I can't represent you anymore." "What?" Madison felt the room tilt. "The Harper family reached out to me," Victor said, each word seeming to cost him. "They know about my daughter, Julia. She's a freshman at Yale. They made it very clear that if I continue with this case, if I proceed with filing, Julia will face consequences. They have connections at Yale. They can make her life very difficult. They can make her disappear from that school. I have to protect my daughter." "They threatened you?" Madison couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I'm sorry," Victor said, sliding an envelope across the desk without meeting her eyes. "I'll refund your retainer. All of it. I'm so sorry, Madison. I have to protect my family." Madison sat frozen in her chair, the envelope in her lap. Her lawyer, the man who'd promised to destroy Ethan, who'd built this whole case, was abandoning her because they'd threatened his daughter. "Victor, please," Madison said. "I have nothing. No evidence, no—" "I'm sorry," Victor repeated. "I can't help you. You need to find another attorney." Madison left his office in a daze. Over the next week, her world collapsed completely. Every divorce attorney in Manhattan refused to take her case. Not just the big names, but even small solo practitioners. Every single one gave the same excuse: conflict of interest. Too busy, not the right fit. But Madison knew the truth. The Harper family had gotten to all of them. Her bank accounts were suddenly frozen. Ethan had filed a claim saying she'd stolen from their joint accounts to fund her vendetta against him. She had $800 in cash, and that was it. A former colleague from her law firm, someone Madison had considered a friend, filed an ethics complaint against her with the New York State Bar Association. Accusations of misconduct, of client conflicts, of things Madison had never done. But the complaint was filed, and now she had to defend herself. Then the criminal charges came: defamation, harassment, stalking. The Manhattan DA's office sent her a letter informing her she was under investigation for multiple felonies related to her campaign of harassment against Ethan Harper. Madison finally found a criminal defense attorney who would talk to her. His name was Paul Richardson, and he looked exhausted just reading her case file. "Look, I'm going to be honest with you," Paul said. "The Harper family has donated millions to the DA's re-election campaign. The DA is personally handling this case. If you don't sign the divorce papers and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, they will prosecute. You will go to jail. They have manufactured evidence. They have witnesses. They have everything they need to convict you." "But I didn't do anything wrong," Madison said desperately. "That doesn't matter," Paul said bluntly. "They have the power and the connections to make this stick. Your only option is to sign whatever they want you to sign and disappear. I'm sorry, but that's the reality." Madison sat in Paul's dingy office and realized she had no options left. No evidence, no lawyer who would fight for her, no money, no family. Facing prison if she didn't surrender completely. She was powerless, completely and utterly powerless against the Harper family machine. 3 days later, Madison sat in a conference room at the offices of Harper Family Legal, their private law firm that handled all family matters. The conference room was designed to intimidate with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, its table that seated 20, its crystal chandelier that probably cost more than Madison's education. Ethan sat across from her with his legal team of 4 attorneys. Ashley wasn't there. She was too upset to attend, they said. Too fragile in her condition. The lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Sterling, with ice blonde hair and a smile like a shark, laid out the terms. Ms. Reeves, Patricia said, pointedly using Madison's maiden name, even though they weren't divorced yet. Here are the terms of the settlement. You will receive nothing from the marriage. You waive all claims to marital assets, including the Tribeca apartment, the Hamptons house, all investment accounts, and all personal property. You will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement preventing you from ever speaking publicly or privately about Mr. Harper, the circumstances of your marriage, or the reasons for your divorce. You will agree to a public statement saying the divorce was mutual and amicable. If you violate the NDA, you will pay $5 million in liquidated damages. Do you understand these terms? Madison stared at the stack of papers in front of her. 50 pages of legal language designed to erase her from Ethan's life, to silence her forever. I'll be homeless, Madison said quietly. I have no money, no job, nowhere to go. That's not our concern, Patricia said. These are the terms. Take them or face prosecution. Madison looked at Ethan. He was looking at his phone, not even paying attention to the proceedings. Like this was a minor business matter, not the destruction of his wife's life. I lost our baby because of you, Madison said, her voice hollow. Ethan finally looked up from his phone. His eyes were cold, empty. You lost a pregnancy because you're weak, Ethan said. You always were weak. Sign the papers, Madison. Stop wasting everyone's time. Through tears that she tried desperately to hold back, Madison signed. Every page felt like cutting off a piece of herself. Her signature got messier as she went, her hands shaking harder with each page. She signed away the apartment she'd decorated, the Hamptons house where she'd imagined raising children, the investment accounts she'd contributed to from her own salary. Everything. On the final page, the NDA, she signed Madison Harper one last time. You're also required to surrender your name, Patricia said, her voice businesslike. The Harper family requests you return to your maiden name, Reeves, immediately. The name change paperwork is included in your packet. Madison had to sign papers changing her name back to Madison Reeves, as if the 3 years of her marriage had never existed. She walked out of that building with nothing but the clothes on her back. They'd even taken her purse, said it was purchased with marital funds, so it belonged to Ethan. Madison stood on the street outside Harper Family Legal and realized she had literally nothing. No money except the $800 in cash she'd hidden. No phone. Ethan had shut off service. No credit cards, all canceled. No home. The apartment was being cleared out as she stood there. She had nothing. That night, Madison returned to the Tribeca apartment to find the locks changed. A note taped to the door informed her that all her personal belongings had been donated to charity. She had 48 hours to vacate the premises permanently. She used her key to the building's gym, which apparently they'd forgotten to deactivate. She showered there and changed into workout clothes she found in her locker. Then she sat in the lobby of her own building like a homeless person, trying to figure out what to do next. Around midnight, sitting on a bench in that marble lobby, nausea hit her like a truck. She ran to the bathroom and vomited violently. As she knelt on the cold tile floor, she counted back. 6 weeks since the miscarriage. But 4 weeks before that, before she found them, before everything fell apart, there had been one last time she and Ethan had been together. It wasn't possible. The hospital said she'd lost the baby. They'd confirmed it. But Madison was a lawyer. She dealt in facts. And the fact was she was vomiting at midnight and her period was late, and she felt exactly like she had 6 weeks ago when she took those tests. She used the last of her cash to walk to a 24-hour pharmacy. Bought 2 pregnancy tests with shaking hands. In the bathroom of a Duane Reade at 1 in the morning, Madison took both tests, both positive. She stared at them in disbelief. took them to the fluorescent light to make sure she was reading them right. 2 pink lines on each test. Positive. Pregnant. The truth crashed over her like a wave. She'd been pregnant with twins. The miscarriage had taken one twin, but not the other. Or maybe she'd gotten pregnant again in those final days before discovery. She didn't know. All she knew was she was pregnant. Madison sat on the floor of that pharmacy bathroom, pregnancy tests in hand, and faced an impossible choice. She could tell Ethan. He'd have to acknowledge this child, support it, maybe even fight the NDA since it involved his biological child. She could use this pregnancy to get back into the fight. But then she remembered his words. You're weak. She remembered Ashley in her bed, comfortable and happy. She remembered her parents choosing Ashley over her. She remembered the men who broke into her apartment and beat her. She remembered signing away everything while Ethan looked at his phone. She remembered Patricia Sterling's shark smile. If she told Ethan about this pregnancy, he would take this child from her. The Harper family would use their lawyers and their money and their power to prove she was unfit. They'd take this baby and give it to Ethan and Ashley to raise. They'd erase her from this child's life, just like they'd erased her from everything else. Or worse, they'd pay her to terminate the pregnancy, make the problem disappear, offer her money to get rid of this last connection to Ethan. Madison looked at the pregnancy tests in her hand, at the 2 pink lines that represented the only thing in the world that was truly hers. She made her decision. She picked up both pregnancy tests, looked at them one last time, then tore them in half, one after another, tore them into pieces. The pieces fell into the toilet. She flushed them and watched them disappear. He would never know. This baby would never know his father, and she would never be Madison Harper again. She left that pharmacy and walked to Port Authority, used her last $800 to buy a bus ticket to Billings, Montana. She had literally thrown a dart at a map in the bus station. Montana was as far from New York as she could imagine. No goodbye, no note, no forwarding address, no trace. That night, Madison Reeves boarded a Greyhound bus and disappeared. Year 1. Maddie West, her new legal name after filing paperwork in Montana, worked as a waitress at a truck stop diner called the Silver Saddle, the kind of place where truckers ate meatloaf at 3 in the morning and left $2 tips. She was 6 months pregnant when she arrived in Billings, showed up at the diner with $40 left to her name and begged for work. The owner, a 60-year-old woman named Ruth, took one look at Madison's desperate face and hired her on the spot. You running from something? Ruth asked. Everything, Madison answered honestly. Ruth nodded. Well, this is a good place to start over. Work hard, keep your head down, and Montana will take care of you. Madison lived in a motel room that cost $60 a week. The Starlight Motel, a sad collection of rooms that smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. But it had a bed and a shower and a door that locked, which was more than she'd had in New York those final days. She waitressed 6 days a week, working doubles when she could, saved every penny, bought maternity clothes from Goodwill, ate the free meal she got with each shift at the diner. At night, lying in that motel room with her hand on her growing belly, Madison would let herself cry. She'd cry for the life she lost, for the family that betrayed her, for the husband who'd destroyed her. But when morning came, she dried her tears and went to work. Ruth watched over her like a guardian angel, made sure Madison took breaks, got her a chair to sit on during slow periods, brought her prenatal vitamins. You got anyone? Ruth asked one day. No, Madison said, no one. Well, you got me now, Ruth said firmly, and when that baby comes, we'll all help. You're not alone, honey. Year 2, Jackson was born on a snowy February morning at Billings Clinic. Madison labored for 18 hours alone, no husband to hold her hand, no mother to coach her through contractions, no family in the waiting room. Ruth was there, though. Ruth held her hand and told her to breathe and told her she was doing great. When Jackson finally came into the world, screaming and perfect, Madison cried harder than she ever had in her life. He looked exactly like Ethan. Light brown hair, blue eyes that would probably turn hazel later. Sharp features even as a newborn. Looking at him was like looking at a tiny version of the man who'd destroyed her life. But he was also hers, completely and entirely hers. What are you going to name him? Ruth asked, holding the baby while Madison rested. Jackson, Madison said. Jackson West. Strong name for a strong boy. Madison took 2 weeks off work, then brought Jackson to the diner with her. Ruth set up a playpen in the office. The regular customers loved having a baby around. Truck drivers would stop by just to make funny faces at him. Madison worked every shift she could, saved every dollar. At night, she'd nurse Jackson and sing to him and tell him about how much she loved him. She never talked about his father. What was there to say? That she'd been married to a monster? That she'd run away rather than let that monster take him? No, Jackson would grow up knowing he was wanted and loved. That would be enough. Year 3. Madison found work as a paralegal at a small law firm in downtown Billings. Anderson and Clark, a 2-person operation specializing in family law, they needed help with filing and research. When they found out Madison had a law degree from Columbia, had worked at a prestigious Manhattan firm, they were shocked. "What are you doing in Montana?" Ted Anderson asked. "Starting over," Madison said. "Do I have the job?" She did. The pay was better than waitressing. Madison moved out of the motel into a small apartment, 1 bedroom, shabby but clean. Jackson had his own room finally, even if it was barely big enough for a crib and changing table. At night, after putting Jackson to bed, Madison started taking online classes. Montana had reciprocity agreements with some states for bar admission. If she took a few supplemental courses and passed the Montana bar exam, she could practice law here. She studied at her kitchen table until 2 or 3 in the morning, then got up with Jackson at 6. She was always tired, always running on coffee and determination. But she was moving forward, building something. Ruth still watched Jackson when Madison had evening classes. The old diner owner had become the grandmother Jackson would never know otherwise. Year 4, Madison passed the Montana bar exam on her first try, scored in the top 10%. She cried when she got the results, sitting in her car in the parking lot of the testing center. She was a lawyer again. Not Madison Harper from Manhattan, but Maddie West from Montana. And that was okay. She opened her own solo practice, working out of a small office above a hardware store. The sign outside read West Legal Services. She specialized in family law, specifically helping women in bad situations. Women like her. Her first client was a woman named Sarah, who needed help filing for divorce from an abusive husband. Madison took the case pro bono. "I can't pay you," Sarah said, crying in Madison's office. "Then don't," Madison said. "Just get safe, get free, that's payment enough." Word spread. The lawyer above the hardware store who helped women for free or cheap, who understood what it was like to be powerless, who fought like hell because she'd been there herself. Madison's practice grew slowly but steadily. She made enough to move into a better apartment. Nothing fancy, but it had 2 bedrooms and a small yard where Jackson could play. Jackson was 2 years old now, talking in full sentences, curious about everything. He asked about his daddy sometimes. "Do I have a daddy?" Jackson asked one evening while Madison made dinner. Madison knelt down to his eye level. "You have a mama who loves you enough for 2 people. Is that okay?" Jackson thought about it seriously, then nodded. "Okay, mama." Year 5. Madison's practice was thriving. Small office in downtown Billings, but respectable. She'd handled over 50 cases, helped dozens of women and some men escape bad situations. She was known in the community as someone who cared, who fought hard, who'd been through hell herself and came out stronger. Jackson was 4 years old now, smart as a whip, funny, kind. He went to a good preschool, had friends, loved trucks and dinosaurs and story time. He was happy, well-adjusted. He knew nothing about the life his mother had escaped. Madison told herself she'd moved on. She never looked at social media, never Googled Ethan's name, never thought about New York. She was lying to herself. She had a fake Facebook account under a pseudonym. Every few months when the pain got bad, she'd look at Ethan and Ashley's pages. Picture perfect life in Greenwich. Ethan had made partner at his firm 2 years ago. Ashley posted constant photos of their daughter Sophia, now 4 years old, same age as Jackson. Family photos at their mansion. Vacation photos from Europe. Photos of Sophia at private preschool. America's power couple, Forbes had called them in an article last year. Young, beautiful, successful, philanthropic. The article never mentioned Ethan's first wife. Madison had been completely erased from his history. Ashley posted things like, "So blessed and grateful for my little family," and "Best daddy ever" under photos of Ethan with Sophia. Madison would look at these photos and feel a complicated mix of emotions. Rage that they got to be happy while she struggled. Relief that she escaped. Guilt that Jackson would never know his father. Satisfaction that she'd built a good life anyway. Then she'd close the laptop and go back to her real life. The life she'd fought for. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, Madison was in court representing a client in a restraining order hearing when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it, focused on her closing argument. The judge granted the restraining order. In the hallway after, she checked her phone. Missed call from a Connecticut number she didn't recognize. Voicemail. Madison's heart started pounding. She hadn't received a call from Connecticut in 5 years. She listened to the voicemail. "Ms. Reeves, this is Catherine Holloway from Holloway and Associates in Greenwich, Connecticut. I'm your father's estate attorney. I'm calling to inform you that your father, Robert Reeves, passed away 2 days ago. I'm very sorry for your loss. The reading of the will is scheduled for this Friday at 2 p.m. at our offices. Your presence is required. Again, I'm very sorry. Please call me back at this number to confirm your attendance." Madison stood in the courthouse hallway, phone pressed to her ear as the message ended. Her father was dead. The man who'd chosen Ashley over her, who'd threatened to destroy her career, who'd told her to be gracious and move on. Dead. She felt nothing. No grief, no sadness, just a hollow emptiness where those feelings should have been. "But your presence is required" meant she was in the will. He'd left her something. Madison called Catherine Holloway back. "Mr. Holloway, this is Madison Reeves. I got your message about my father." "Oh, Ms. Reeves, thank you for calling back," Catherine said, her voice professional and sympathetic. "I know this must be difficult. Can you make it to Greenwich for the reading on Friday?" "I can," Madison said. "Can I ask, why is my presence required?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss the contents of the will over the phone," Catherine said. "But yes, you are named in the will. I'd strongly encourage you to attend." Madison made arrangements. She'd fly out Thursday, attend the reading Friday, fly back Saturday morning. Quick trip. She left Jackson with Diane, a 68-year-old retired teacher who'd become Jackson's unofficial grandmother. Diane lived down the hall from them, watched Jackson whenever Madison needed help. "You sure you're okay?" Diane asked, giving Madison a hug. "Going back there after all this time?" "I'll be fine," Madison said. "It's just one day, in and out." "You call me if you need anything," Diane said. "And tell your mother I said she's lucky you're even giving her the time of day after what she did." Madison smiled weakly. Diane knew the whole story. She was one of the few people Madison had trusted with the truth. The flight to JFK felt surreal. Madison hadn't been east of the Mississippi in 5 years. Seeing the New York skyline from the plane window made her chest tight. She rented a car and drove to Greenwich, checking into a Holiday Inn near the train station. Nothing fancy. She wasn't here to reminisce or reconnect. She was here for the will reading, and then she was gone. Friday afternoon, Madison walked into Holloway and Associates, a tasteful law office in downtown Greenwich. All brass fixtures and oriental rugs and oil paintings of landscapes. The receptionist led her to a conference room. Madison walked in to find her mother, Caroline, already seated at the table. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. Hadn't even texted. Carolyn looked older, still elegant in that old money way, pearl necklace and expensive haircut, but older, tired. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Madison," Carolyn said coldly, not standing. "Mother," Madison replied. "It's Maddie now." "How very pedestrian," Carolyn said. Madison sat down at the opposite end of the table. Also present in the conference room were Ashley, looking uncomfortable in a designer dress, Ethan, smirking like this was all a big joke, and various cousins Madison barely remembered. Ashley's daughter, Sophia, now 4 years old, sat on Ashley's lap, playing with her mother's necklace. Madison looked at Sophia and saw what Jackson might have looked like if he'd grown up here. Same Harper features, same blue eyes. Catherine Holloway entered and closed the door. "Thank you all for coming," Catherine said. "I know this is a difficult time. I'll try to make this as brief as possible. Mr. Reeves left a fairly straightforward will with a few specific bequests." She put on reading glasses and opened a leather folder. "To my nephews, Thomas and Andrew, I leave the contents of my workshop and tools, knowing they'll appreciate and use them." The cousins nodded. To my wife, Caroline, I leave the Greenwich house, all its contents, and $3 million from my investment accounts. Caroline's face remained impassive. To my daughter, Ashley, I leave $500,000. Ashley smiled, relieved. And to my daughter, Madison Reeves, formerly Harper, Catherine paused and looked directly at Madison. I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes all remaining investment accounts, the property in Nantucket, and my shares in Reeves Capital Partners. Total estimated value, $12.4 million. The room erupted. What? Ashley half stood, nearly dropping Sophia. That's impossible, Carolyn said. There must be a mistake. No mistake, Catherine said calmly. Mr. Reeves was very clear about his wishes. This will is obviously invalid, Ethan said, standing. Madison signed away any claim to family assets when we divorced. My lawyers will challenge this. Mr. Harper, Catherine said with barely concealed disdain, you have no legal standing here whatsoever. You're not family. You have no claim to anything in this room. Maddie, please, Ashley said, her voice breaking. We can share it. We can work something out. I'm your sister. Madison looked at Ashley, really looked at her for the first time in 5 years. Ashley looked tired too, older than 27. There were shadows under her eyes her makeup couldn't quite hide. Like you shared my husband? Madison said, her voice ice cold. Ashley flinched like she'd been slapped. There's a letter, Catherine said, handing Madison an envelope. Mr. Reeves wanted you to have this. Madison opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter in her father's handwriting. His actual handwriting, not typed. This was personal. She read it silently while everyone watched. Madison, your mother and I made a choice 5 years ago that I've regretted every day since. We thought we were protecting you by siding with Ashley and Ethan. We believed if we made it clear there was no path back to this family, Ethan would leave you alone. That he'd take what he wanted, Ashley, and let you go. We were trying to show him you had nothing he could take, nothing he could hurt you with. We were cowards, and we were wrong. We underestimated his cruelty. This money won't earn your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I know that. But your child, yes. I know about your son. I've had an investigator keeping tabs to make sure you were safe. Your child deserves what Ashley's daughter has. He deserves security and opportunity, and all the advantages this family can provide. I should have stood by you 5 years ago. I should have told Ethan Harper and his family to go to hell. I should have chosen my daughter over social standing and avoiding scandal. I didn't. That's a regret I'll carry to my grave. I'm sorry I never found the courage to tell you this while I was alive. I'm sorry for everything. Your father, Robert Madison's hands shook as she lowered the letter. Her father knew about Jackson, had known for 5 years, had been watching from afar to make sure they were safe, and he'd left everything to her and Jackson, not to make amends. He said it himself, he couldn't earn forgiveness, but to give Jackson what he deserved. This is ridiculous, Ethan said, his voice angry now. We're contesting this will. No judge will let her walk away with the family fortune after the way she what? Catherine interrupted, her voice sharp. After the way she caught you in bed with her sister? After you embezzled money to fund your affair? After your family had her assaulted and drove her from the state? Please, Mr. Harper, continue. I'd love to hear how you plan to spin this in court. Ethan's face went red. You should leave, Catherine said to Ethan. You were invited as Ashley's guest, but you're not welcome here. Security will show you out if necessary. For a moment, Madison thought Ethan might actually refuse, but Catherine picked up her phone and Ethan stormed out. The rest of the will reading proceeded quickly. Madison signed papers acknowledging the inheritance. Catherine gave her folders with account information, property deeds, investment portfolios, $12.4 million. The Nantucket house, shares in her father's investment firm. For the first time in 5 years, Madison had real money, serious money, the kind of money that meant security for Jackson, meant she could expand her practice, meant she could help more women, meant freedom. She walked out of that conference room without saying goodbye to her mother or Ashley. There was nothing to say. In the parking lot, she sat in her rental car and called Diane. How did it go? Diane asked. My father left me $12 million, Madison said, still not quite believing it. Diane whooped. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. You and Jackson are set for life. I can expand the practice, Madison said, her mind already racing. I can hire staff, take more cases, offer more services. I can help so many more women, Diane. First you celebrate, Diane said. Then you change the world. How's that sound? Good, Madison said, smiling for the first time in days. That sounds really good. That night, Madison splurged on room service at her hotel, ordered champagne and the most expensive thing on the menu, sat in her hotel room and let herself feel the weight of what just happened. She was wealthy. Jackson was provided for. She could do anything she wanted. She pulled out her laptop and started making notes. Ideas for the practice, a nonprofit legal aid foundation, office expansion, hiring attorneys and staff, creating something that would help women for years to come. Around 11 p.m., her phone exploded with notifications. Someone had leaked the will reading to the press. The New York Post headline read, "Scorned ex-wife inherits millions while power couple left out in cold." The article included a photo from the will reading taken through the conference room window. There was Madison. There was Ashley. There was the moment Catherine announced the inheritance. But the photo also showed Madison's phone on the conference table. And on the phone screen, visible to anyone who looked closely, was her lock screen photo. A photo of Jackson. Madison stared at her phone in horror as the notifications multiplied. Comments on the article. Tweets. Facebook posts. Wait, she has a kid? That boy looks exactly like Ethan Harper. Holy shit, is this his secret love child? Side-by-side comparison with Ethan's childhood photos, they're identical. Within 2 hours, the photo of Jackson was everywhere. Someone had zoomed in on her phone screen, enhanced the image. Side-by-side comparisons with Ethan's childhood photos with Sophia's baby pictures. The resemblance was unmistakable, undeniable. Jackson looked exactly like Ethan Harper, because he was Ethan Harper's biological son. Madison sat on her hotel bed, watching her secret unravel in real time on social media. At 11:45 p.m., heavy knocking on her hotel room door. Madison looked through the peephole. 2 police officers stood in the hallway. With shaking hands, she opened the door. "Madison Reeves?" the first officer asked. "Yes." "We have a court order," he said, handing her papers. "You're required to appear in family court tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. You've been served." Madison took the papers with numb fingers. Ethan Harper had filed for emergency custody of Jackson, claiming Madison had kidnapped his biological son and used a false identity to hide the child from him. The papers claimed Madison was an unfit mother with a history of mental instability per medical records, that she'd fled the state while pregnant to deny Ethan his parental rights, that she'd only returned to Connecticut when money was involved. "Ma'am," the second officer said, "we're also authorized to collect a DNA sample from your son to confirm paternity." "He's in Montana," Madison said, her voice barely functioning. "Local police have been dispatched to your residence," the first officer said. "They'll collect the sample. They'll be gentle, but it's happening tonight." "You can't," Madison whispered. "He's with my neighbor. He's sleeping. You'll terrify him." "We have a warrant," the officer said, not unkindly. "It's already in process." They left. Madison closed the door and collapsed against it. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built. 5 years of hiding, of running, of protecting Jackson from this exact situation. Gone in one photograph. Ethan knew about Jackson now, and he was coming for him. Madison called Diane, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. "Diane, police are coming to the apartment," Madison said. "They're going to take a DNA sample from Jackson. Don't let them scare him. Please." "What's happening?" Diane sounded frightened. "Ethan knows about Jackson," Madison said. "He's filing for custody." "Oh God, Diane, what have I done?" Madison sank to the hotel room floor and cried. She'd thought she'd won, thought the inheritance was her vindication, her father's final gift. Instead, she'd handed Ethan the weapon to destroy her one last time, because now he knew about Jackson. And the Harper family always got what they wanted. The next morning, Madison walked into family court in Stamford, Connecticut, with no lawyer, no preparation, and barely any sleep. She'd spent the night trying to find an attorney who would take an emergency custody case, but it was Friday night. Everyone was gone for the weekend. The courtroom was smaller than she expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a tired-looking judge shuffling papers at the bench. Ethan sat at the plaintiff's table with a team of 4 attorneys from Bennett Chase and Lowe, the best family law firm in Connecticut. All of them in expensive suits, leather briefcases open, looking like they'd prepared for weeks. Madison sat alone at the defense table with nothing but her purse. Judge Sarah Patterson entered and everyone stood. She was in her 60s, gray hair pulled back, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd probably seen every trick in the book. "We're here for Harper versus Reeves, emergency custody motion," Judge Patterson said. "Counselors, are we ready to proceed?" The lead attorney for Ethan stood. His name was Marcus Wellington, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who charged $1,000 an hour. "Ready for plaintiff, Your Honor," Marcus said. "Ms. Reeves, are you represented by counsel?" Judge Patterson asked. "No, Your Honor," Madison said, standing. "I only received notice of this hearing last night. I haven't had time to secure representation." "Do you need a continuance to find counsel?" Madison looked at Marcus Wellington and his team. They would fight any continuance. And meanwhile, what would happen to Jackson? "I'd like to proceed, Your Honor," Madison said. "Very well. Mr. Wellington, present your case." What followed was the most brutal hour of Madison's life. Marcus Wellington laid out Ethan's case with devastating efficiency. PowerPoint presentation, exhibits, witnesses, all designed to paint Madison as an unstable, vindictive woman who'd kidnapped Ethan's child. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "the facts are undisputed. Ms. Reeves was pregnant when she fled New York 5 years ago. She used a false identity, changed her name to Maddie West, moved across the country. She never informed Mr. Harper of the pregnancy or the birth of his son. She denied him his fundamental right to know his own child." Marcus showed DNA test results on the screen. Expedited testing done overnight. 99.99% match. Jackson West was biologically Ethan Harper's son. "Ms. Reeves has no legitimate reason for this deception," Marcus continued. "The divorce was amicable. There was no abuse, no violence, no reason to hide this child except vindictiveness and spite." He showed Madison's medical records from the hospital 5 years ago. The miscarriage. The notation that she'd been emotionally distressed and possibly suicidal. "She has documented mental health issues," Marcus said. "She fled the state while potentially suicidal and pregnant. She's been living under a false identity, which raises questions about her judgment and stability." Then came the bombshell. "And Your Honor, Ms. Reeves only returned to Connecticut when her father died and left her a substantial inheritance. She had no interest in being part of this family, no interest in her son having a relationship with his father, until money was involved. That speaks volumes about her priorities." Marcus sat down, looking satisfied. Judge Patterson looked at Madison. "Ms. Reeves, would you like to respond?" Madison stood on shaking legs. "Your Honor, everything Mr. Wellington just told you is technically true, but completely misleading," Madison said. "Yes, I was pregnant when I left New York, but I left because—" She stopped. "The NDA. She'd signed papers saying she couldn't talk about the circumstances of the divorce. If she violated the NDA now, she'd owe $5 million. Money she didn't actually have access to yet, since the inheritance was still in probate." "Because why, Ms. Reeves?" Judge Patterson prompted. "Because the marriage was over," Madison said carefully, "and I wanted a fresh start. By denying Mr. Harper knowledge of his child, I did what I thought was best for my son. And what you thought was best was for him to never know his father, never have access to his father's resources and family." Marcus Wellington stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, we'd like to call a witness, Ashley Harper, Mr. Harper's wife." Madison's blood ran cold as Ashley walked into the courtroom. Ashley looked nervous, dressed conservatively in a navy suit, her hair pulled back. She looked like a concerned family member, not the woman who destroyed Madison's life. After being sworn in, Ashley took the witness stand. "Mrs. Harper," Marcus said, How would you describe your relationship with your sister Madison? We used to be close, Ashley said, her voice soft. Very close. But Madison has always had a jealous streak. Even as children, if I got attention from our parents, she'd get upset. When Ethan and I fell in love, she couldn't handle it. Objection, Madison said, standing. That's not... Ms. Reeves, you're not represented by counsel, so you can't make objections, Judge Patterson said. But Mrs. Harper, please stick to relevant facts. When Madison found out about Ethan and me, Ashley continued, she became dangerous. She threatened us, said terrible things. That's why we had to get a restraining order. We were genuinely afraid of her. That's a lie, Madison shouted. There was never a restraining order. Reeves, sit down, Judge Patterson said sternly. You'll have a chance to respond. But Madison had no evidence, no way to prove Ashley was lying. Mrs. Harper, Marcus said, in your opinion, is Ms. Reeves fit to raise a child alone? I love my sister, Ashley said, tears forming. But she's always been unstable, obsessive. The fact that she hid Jackson from Ethan for 5 years, kept a child from knowing his father, that's not the act of a stable person. That's vindictive and cruel. Ashley looked directly at Madison. My daughter asks about Jackson now. She's seen the photos online. She wants to meet her half-brother. And I think Jackson deserves to know his father, his sister, his whole family. Madison has stolen 5 years from all of us. Madison wanted to scream, to throw something, and to make them all see the truth, but she sat there, powerless, watching Ashley destroy her on the witness stand. Marcus Wellington rested his case. Judge Patterson looked at Madison. Ms. Reeves, do you have any witnesses or evidence to present? I have the truth, Madison said desperately. Your Honor, 5 years ago, I walked in on my husband in bed with my sister. I just found out I was pregnant. The shock caused a miscarriage, or I thought it did. Apparently, I was carrying twins and only lost one. My family sided with them. They told me to sign the divorce papers and move on. Ethan's family had me assaulted. They threatened my lawyer. They destroyed my career. I left because I had nothing and no one. I was trying to protect my baby. Do you have evidence of any of this? Judge Patterson asked. Medical records, police reports, witnesses? No, Madison admitted. They took it all, and I signed an NDA, so I'm not even supposed to be talking about this. But Your Honor, you have to believe me. I'm not vindictive or unstable. I'm a mother who did what she had to do to protect her child. Ms. Reeves, I appreciate your position, Judge Patterson said, but I have to make decisions based on evidence, not stories. And the evidence I have shows that you disappeared for 5 years with Mr. Harper's child. Whatever your reasons, that's parental interference. Madison felt the room closing in around her. I'm going to grant temporary custody to Mr. Harper pending a full evaluation, Judge Patterson said. Ms. Reeves, you'll have supervised visitation twice a week. We'll schedule a full custody hearing in 30 days. No, Madison stood up. You can't do this. He's my son. I'm all he knows. You can't just give him to a stranger. Bailiff, restrain Ms. Reeves, Judge Patterson said. A bailiff moved toward Madison. She backed away, panic rising in her throat. Suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open with a bang. Everyone turned. Victor Cruz walked in, carrying a briefcase, dressed in an expensive suit. Your Honor, Victor said, his voice carrying through the courtroom. Victor Cruz, representing Ms. Madison Reeves. I apologize for my tardiness. I have new evidence that will substantially impact these proceedings. I request the court delay its ruling to hear this evidence. Judge Patterson looked annoyed. Mr. Cruz, this hearing is nearly concluded. Your Honor, this evidence directly contradicts testimony already given. It's critical to your decision. I ask for just 10 minutes of the court's time. Judge Patterson sighed. Fine, 10 minutes. But this better be good, Mr. Cruz. Victor opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Madison stared at him in shock. Victor had abandoned her 5 years ago. Why was he here now? Your Honor, Victor said, 5 years ago, I represented Ms. Reeves in her divorce from Mr. Harper. During that representation, I was approached by the Harper family's attorney with a proposition. If I stopped representing Ms. Reeves, they would ensure no harm came to my daughter, who was a freshman at Yale at the time. It was unambiguously a threat. Objection, Marcus Wellington shouted. This is completely inappropriate and irrelevant. I have a recording of that conversation, Victor said, holding up a phone. Would the court like to hear it? Judge Patterson leaned forward, interested now. I would. Victor played the recording, a man's voice, identified as Richard Morrison, senior partner at Harper Family Legal. Mr. Cruz, I'll be direct. Your daughter Julia is doing well at Yale. Beautiful campus, beautiful young woman. It would be unfortunate if something happened that might jeopardize her future there. The Harper family has significant influence at Yale. We'd hate to have to use it, but if you continue representing Madison Reeves, if you proceed with filing against Ethan Harper, we'll have no choice. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Victor's voice on the recording. You're threatening my daughter. I'm suggesting that choices have consequences. Drop Ms. Reeves as a client, and Julia finishes Yale without any problems. Continue, and well, accidents happen. Dorm fires, false academic integrity claims. Young women walking alone at night can be very vulnerable. The courtroom was silent. Judge Patterson's face had gone hard. Mr. Wellington, Judge Patterson said slowly, did Harper Family Legal threaten this man's daughter? Your Honor, this recording could easily be fabricated, Marcus said. We'd need to authenticate. I have the phone records showing the call, Victor said. I have text messages from Richard Morrison confirming the meeting. I have my original case notes describing the threat, and I have this. He pulled out another document. This is a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights signed by Ethan Harper 5 years ago. He signed away his rights to Ms. Reeves's unborn child in exchange for $2 million from the Harper Family Trust. The document was filed the day before Ms. Reeves left New York. The courtroom erupted. Ashley gasped. Ethan stood up, face red. That's a forgery, Ethan shouted. It's notarized, Victor said calmly, by your family's attorney, Richard Morrison. Mr. Morrison died last year. When his firm was closing his files, they found this document along with others related to Harper family matters. They turned everything over to me last week, after I reached out asking about the threats from 5 years ago. Judge Patterson took the document and examined it carefully. Your Honor, Victor continued, Mr. Harper knew Ms. Reeves was pregnant 5 years ago. His family paid him $2 million to relinquish his parental rights, so there would be no scandal baby. He took the money. He signed the papers. And now, 5 years later, when Miss Reeves unexpectedly inherits wealth, suddenly he wants custody? This isn't about fatherhood. This is about money and revenge. That document is fraudulent, Marcus Wellington said, but he sounded less certain now. Mr. Harper, Judge Patterson said coldly, did you sign this document? Ethan was silent, trapped. Let the record show the plaintiff is declining to answer, Judge Patterson said. Mr. Cruz, you said you have more evidence? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Harper is currently under investigation by the SEC for embezzlement at his current firm, and Ms. Ashley Harper was complicit in falsifying documents to frame Ms. Reeves. That's not true, Ashley said from the witness stand. I didn't. Victor pressed play on another recording. Ashley's voice crying, talking to Caroline. He made me lie, Mom. He said if I didn't help him get custody, he'd take Sophia and I'd never see her again. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to do it, but I was scared. I'm always scared of him. I've been scared for 5 years. The courtroom went completely silent. Ashley's face crumpled. She started crying, real tears this time, not the performance from earlier. Catherine Holloway, the estate attorney, stood up from the gallery where she'd been watching. Your Honor, Catherine said, I'm Catherine Holloway, and I'm also representing Ms. Madison Reeves. We have video evidence of Mr. Harper's legal team attempting to bribe court officials earlier this week. The plan was to alter DNA testing procedures to introduce questions about Ms. Reeves's mental fitness. Bailiff, Judge Patterson said, her voice hard as steel, detain Mr. Harper. Mrs. Harper, you are also being detained for perjury and conspiracy. Mr. Wellington, your firm is going to be facing an ethics inquiry for this disaster. Police officers moved into the courtroom. Ethan was handcuffed, still protesting. Ashley was crying as they put handcuffs on her, too. As they led Ashley past Madison, Ashley looked at her sister with desperate, pleading eyes. "I'm sorry," Ashley whispered. "Maddie, I'm so sorry. He made me—" "You were never sorry," Madison said, her voice cold but quiet. "You were just scared. There's a difference." Ashley was led away in handcuffs. Judge Patterson looked at Madison. "Ms. Reeves, I'm reversing my temporary custody order. Your son stays with you. We're scheduling a full hearing for 30 days from now, but given what I've just heard, I expect this case to be dismissed. Mr. Cruz, thank you for bringing this evidence to the court's attention. Better late than never." The hearing was over. Madison walked out of the courtroom in a daze. In the hallway, she turned to Victor Cruz. "Why did you help me?" Madison asked. "You abandoned me 5 years ago." Victor looked at her, and for the first time she saw genuine shame in his eyes. "My daughter Julia called me 2 weeks ago," Victor said quietly. "She's graduating Yale this year, getting ready to apply to law school, and she asked me a question that's been haunting me ever since. She said, 'Dad, if someone threatened me to make you abandon a client, would you want that client to forgive you?' And I realize I don't deserve your forgiveness, but your son deserves a fighter." "I don't need you to save me," Madison said. "I needed you to do your job 5 years ago." "I know," Victor said. "I'm not here to save you. I'm here because I'm a coward who's tired of being a coward." "Those documents? Richard Morrison's firm sent them to me when they were closing his estate. I've been sitting on them for a week, trying to decide if I had the guts to use them. When I saw the news about your inheritance and the custody filing, I knew I had to act. Not for you, for the man I want my daughter to think I am." Madison studied him. "You don't get redemption, Victor. You just get to be useful." "I'll take it," Victor said. Catherine Holloway joined them in the hallway. "Ms. Reeves," Catherine said, "I'll be handling all the legal matters related to your father's estate and this custody case. No charge. Consider it part of the inheritance. Your father would want you protected." "Why are you doing this?" Madison asked. "Because I watched that hearing," Catherine said, "and I'll be damned if I let another powerful family destroy a woman who's done nothing wrong." Madison felt tears threatening. 2 lawyers willing to fight for her. 5 years ago, she'd had no one. Now she had an army. "Thank you," Madison said. "Both of you." She drove straight to the airport, got on the next flight to Montana. 6 hours later, she walked into her apartment building. Diane was waiting in Madison's apartment with Jackson. He was playing with trucks on the living room floor, completely oblivious to the storm that had been raging around him. "Mama!" Jackson jumped up and ran to her. Madison scooped him up, held him tight, breathing in the scent of his shampoo. "I missed you, baby," Madison whispered. "I missed you too, Mama. The police came and they took a picture of my mouth with a cotton stick. Diane said it was okay. Was it okay?" "It was okay," Madison said, even though nothing about this situation was okay. That night, after putting Jackson to bed, Madison sat at her kitchen table with Diane. "What happens now?" Diane asked. "We wait," Madison said. "There's a hearing in 30 days. But Victor thinks the case will be dismissed. Ethan signed away his parental rights 5 years ago. He took $2 million to disappear from our lives. He only came back when I got $12 million. "So you won," Diane said. "Maybe," Madison said. "Or maybe this is just the beginning of another fight." But looking at Jackson's room, hearing his soft breathing through the open door, Madison felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone anymore. The next 30 days passed in a blur of preparation. Victor Cruz and Catherine Holloway worked around the clock building Madison's defense. The media coverage was relentless. Madison Reeves was suddenly national news. The Today Show wanted an interview. Good Morning America. Dr. Phil. Everyone wanted the story of the woman who disappeared with her ex-husband's baby, only to return 5 years later and inherit millions. Madison declined every single interview. The only statement she gave was through Catherine. "I did what any mother would do. I protected my child. I look forward to proving that in court." Ethan was released on bail, but his reputation was destroyed. The SEC investigation went public. Goldman Sachs fired him. 3 more women came forward saying the Harper family had paid them to keep quiet about affairs with Ethan. Ashley filed for divorce and moved back in with Caroline in Greenwich. The full custody hearing was scheduled for December 15th in Stamford Family Court. Judge Patterson would preside again. Madison flew back to Connecticut a week early to prepare. This time Jackson came with her. She wasn't letting him out of her sight. They stayed at a hotel near the courthouse. Diane came too, to watch Jackson during the hearing. The night before the trial, Madison couldn't sleep. She stood at the Hood's window watching snow fall over Connecticut and thought about how far she'd come. 5 years ago, she'd left this state with nothing but a bus ticket and a secret. Now she was back, fighting for her son in front of the whole country. The courthouse was packed. Media cameras lined the street outside. Inside, every seat in the gallery was filled. This had become the trial of the year. Madison wore a simple navy suit, hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She wanted to look like what she was, a working mother, not some wealthy heiress. Ethan wore an expensive suit, but he'd lost weight. He looked tired, desperate. His team of lawyers had been reduced to just Marcus Wellington. The rest had withdrawn when the bribery allegations surfaced. Judge Patterson called the court to order at 9 a.m. sharp. "We're here for the full custody hearing in Harper versus Reeves," Judge Patterson said. "Mr. Cruz, Ms. Holloway, are you ready to proceed?" "Ready for the defense, Your Honor," Victor said. "Ready for plaintiff," Marcus Wellington said, though he didn't sound confident. For the next 3 days, they fought. Marcus Wellington tried to argue that despite signing away his rights, Ethan had been coerced. He claimed the Harper family had pressured him, that he didn't understand what he was signing, that he'd always wanted to be a father but was scared. Victor Cruz destroyed that narrative. He showed bank records proving Ethan spent the $2 million on luxury items within 6 months. Vacations, cars, a boat. Not the actions of a man who'd been coerced. He presented testimony from Richard Morrison's former secretary, who confirmed Ethan had bragged about getting paid to make a problem go away. Marcus called witnesses who said Madison was vindictive and unstable. Victor called witnesses from Montana who testified Madison was a dedicated mother, a respected attorney, a pillar of the community. Ruth from the diner testified about Madison working through her pregnancy, never complaining, always doing her best. Diane testified about watching Jackson grow up, about Madison's devotion to her son, about the life they'd built. Ted Anderson, Madison's former boss, testified about her character and work ethic. "Best paralegal I ever hired," he said, "and when she passed the bar, I told her she could do anything she set her mind to. She proved me right." Ashley was called to testify again. This time she told the truth. "I seduced Ethan," Ashley said, her voice small. "I knew he was married to my sister. I didn't care. I was young and stupid and jealous. Madison had everything, the career, the husband, the life I wanted, so I took it from her." "And 5 years later?" Victor asked. "Why did you lie in your earlier testimony?" "Because Ethan threatened to take Sophia from me," Ashley said, tears streaming down her face. "He said if I didn't help him get custody of Jackson, he'd prove I was an unfit mother and take my daughter. I was terrified. I've been terrified of him for 5 years. He's not a good man. He never was." "Do you think Jackson should be in Ethan's custody?" Victor asked. "No," Ashley whispered. "Jackson should be with Madison. She's a good mother. Better than I ever was a sister." Ashley looked at Madison. "I'm sorry, Maddie. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I'm sorry." Madison didn't respond, just watched her sister fall apart on the witness stand. The prosecution rested. Victor called one final witness, Madison herself. She took the stand, was sworn in, and looked out at the packed courtroom. At the judge, the jury of public opinion in the gallery, the cameras that would broadcast this everywhere. "Ms. Reeves," Victor said gently, "tell us about the day you left New York." Madison took a deep breath and told the story. All of it, finding Ethan and Ashley in bed, the miscarriage, her parents choosing Ashley, the evidence being stolen, Victor abandoning her case, the threats, the assault, the forced NDA, discovering she was still pregnant, tearing up the pregnancy test, getting on that bus. "Why didn't you tell Ethan about Jackson?" Victor asked. "Because I was terrified," Madison said simply. "Terrified they'd take him from me. Terrified they'd prove I was unfit like they proved I was powerless. Terrified my son would grow up in a family that valued money and appearances over people. I know it was wrong to keep Jackson from his father, but I didn't think Ethan deserved to be Jackson's father. And 5 years later, looking at everything he's done to try to take Jackson from me now, I still don't think he deserves it. Tell us about Jackson, Victor said. What kind of child is he? Madison's face softened. He's kind, so kind. He cries when he sees hurt animals. He shares his toys at school, even when he doesn't want to. He asks questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do stars come from? What happens when we die? He's smart and funny, and he makes me laugh every single day. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. If the court awards custody to Mr. Harper, what do you think will happen to Jackson? He'll be confused and scared, Madison said. He doesn't know Ethan. To Jackson, Ethan is a stranger, taking him away from the only home he's ever known, the only parent he's ever had. That would be traumatic. And I don't trust Ethan not to use Jackson as a pawn. This isn't about being a father. This is about winning. Ethan doesn't lose. He never has. And he's not going to start now. Marcus Wellington cross-examined her, tried to poke holes in her story, but Madison held firm. She'd lived this story. She knew every detail. After 3 days of testimony, both sides rested. Judge Patterson took a 15-minute recess, then returned with her ruling. This has been one of the most complicated cases I've heard in 30 years on the bench, Judge Patterson said. We have a mother who admittedly kept a child from his father. We have a father who signed away his parental rights for money. We have a family that used threats and intimidation. And most importantly, we have a 4-year-old boy who deserves stability and love. Madison held her breath. The law is clear, Judge Patterson continued. When someone voluntarily relinquishes parental rights, they cannot later reclaim those rights simply because circumstances change. Mr. Harper signed a legal document giving up his rights to this child. He was paid $2 million. He cannot now claim he wants to be a father. Ethan's face went white. Furthermore, the evidence of intimidation, threats, and bribery is deeply troubling. This court will be referring this matter to the Connecticut Attorney General for criminal investigation. Mr. Wellington, your client should expect to face additional charges. Finally, the most important consideration is the best interest of the child. Jackson West has lived with his mother his entire life. By all accounts, he is happy, healthy, well-adjusted. Removing him from her custody would cause significant harm. Therefore, this court awards full legal and physical custody to Madison Reeves. Mr. Harper's parental rights remain terminated. This case is dismissed. The gavel came down. Madison collapsed in her chair. Sobbing with relief, Victor hugged her. Catherine squeezed her shoulder. Across the courtroom, Ethan stood up and walked out without a word. Marcus Wellington looked relieved it was over. In the hallway afterward, reporters swarmed. Madison read a prepared statement. I'm grateful to Judge Patterson for seeing the truth. My son and I can finally move on with our lives. I hope this case reminds people that money and power shouldn't determine who gets to be a parent. Love does. Dedication does. Being there every single day does. Thank you. She didn't take questions, just got in the car where Diane was waiting with Jackson. We won, baby, Madison said, hugging Jackson tight. We're going home. Was that man trying to take me away? Jackson asked. He'd been shielded from most of it, but he'd picked up on the tension. Yes, Madison said honestly, but the judge said no. You're staying with Mama. Good, Jackson said firmly. I like it with you. 3 weeks later, Madison was back in Montana for Christmas when the news broke. Ethan Harper had been arrested again, this time for embezzlement, witness tampering, and attempting to bribe court officials. The SEC had built a case proving he'd stolen over $8 million from 3 different firms over 10 years. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Ashley pleaded guilty to perjury and conspiracy. She got 2 years probation and lost custody of Sophia, who went to live with Caroline. Madison didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired, ready for this chapter to finally close. She called Caroline. Her mother answered on the 3rd ring. Madison, Caroline said quietly. I wanted you to know that I'm bringing Jackson to Connecticut in the spring, Madison said. He should know his grandmother and his cousin Sophia, if you want to meet him. Silence on the other end. Then Caroline's voice, thick with tears. I would like that very much. I'm not ready to forgive you, Madison said. I don't know if I ever will be. But Jackson deserves to know where he comes from, the good and the bad. I understand, Caroline said. Madison, I know I failed you. I chose wrong. I let that man destroy my family because I was worried about what people would think. I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I know, Madison said. We'll talk more when I visit. Merry Christmas, Mother. Merry Christmas, Madison. Madison hung up and looked out at the Montana snow. Jackson was building a snowman in the backyard with Diane, his laughter carrying through the cold air. 5 years ago, she'd torn up a pregnancy test and run away from everything she knew. Today, she had a son who was safe and happy, a thriving law practice, financial security, and the beginning of healing with her family. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real, and real was better than perfect any day. 6 months after the trial, Madison sat in her expanded office reviewing applications. The Reeves Legal Aid Foundation now occupied 3 floors. 10 attorneys, case managers, social workers. They handled over 200 cases a year. On her desk sat the framed pieces of her torn pregnancy test, a reminder of where she'd been, what she'd survived. A knock. Her assistant poked her head in. Ms. Reeves, you have a walk-in. No appointment. She says it's urgent. Send her in. A young woman entered, 24 years old, clutching a pregnancy test, mascara running, looking exactly like Madison had looked 5 years ago. I'm sorry, I don't have an appointment, the woman said, but I saw your sign and didn't know where else to go. Madison gestured to the chair. What's your name? Emma. My husband is cheating on me with my roommate, and I just found out I'm pregnant. I don't know what to do. Emma broke down sobbing. Madison opened her drawer and pulled out the framed test. She set it between them. 5 years ago, I stood exactly where you're standing, Madison said quietly. Through tears, I signed divorce papers, tore up my pregnancy test, and left everything behind. I thought destroying that test meant destroying my future. Emma stared at the torn pieces. I was wrong, Madison continued. I didn't destroy my future. I protected it. The door opened. Jackson, now 5, peeked in. Mom, can I have a snack? 5 more minutes, baby, Madison smiled. Jackson waved and disappeared. That's your son? Emma whispered. The baby I thought I had to hide from the world, Madison said. Today, he's the reason I wake up every morning and fight for women like us. She slid tissues and her business card across the desk. You don't have to tear anything up, Emma. Not the test, not your future, not yourself. But I don't have any money. I can't afford a lawyer. This office was built for women who can't afford lawyers. You're not alone anymore. For 2 hours, Madison took notes while Emma told her story. Gaslighting, isolation, financial control, painfully familiar. You did the hardest part, Madison said when Emma finished. You asked for help. Everything else we handled together. As Emma left with resources and Madison's direct number, she turned back. Thank you for not making me feel weak. You're not weak, Madison said. You're a survivor. And survivors don't just leave. They rise. That evening, Madison got a text from an unknown number. Ms. Reeves, this is Emma Mitchell. Baby Madison was born tonight. 8 pounds, healthy and perfect. Thank you for everything. You didn't just save my life. You taught me how to live it. Attached was a photo of tiny baby Madison in a pink blanket. Madison smiled, saved the photo. She'd helped hundreds of women, but this one felt especially meaningful. Emma had named her daughter Madison, a living legacy of survival. Later that week, another woman appeared at her door after hours. Jessica from Wyoming, desperate and scared. Abusive boyfriend, 2 kids, no money, nowhere to go. Madison brought her in, showed her the framed test, told her story again. How did you get from there to here? Jessica asked. One day at a time, Madison said. One choice at a time. I got on a bus with $800 and a secret. I worked while pregnant. I slept in a motel that smelled like cigarettes. I built this from nothing because giving up wasn't an option. By 9 p.m., Jessica and her kids were safe in the foundation's shelter. Madison drove home exhausted but satisfied. This was the work, not the big victories or media coverage. This, one woman at a time, one family saved, one future changed. At home, Jackson was asleep. Madison checked on him, kissed his forehead. "You saved me, baby," she whispered. "You'll never know how much." She thought about Emma and Jessica and hundreds of others. Each one a life changed, each one proof that survival was possible. This was why she'd fought so hard, not just to save herself, but to light the way for others. Through tears, she'd signed the papers. Through pain, she'd torn up the test. Through fear, she'd left. 5 years later, she hadn't just survived. She'd built something that would outlast her, a foundation helping women for decades to come. That was better than any revenge, better than any vindication. Madison turned off the lights and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women needing help, but tonight she could rest, knowing she'd turned her pain into purpose. And that made every tear worth it. 1 year after the trial, Madison stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing legislators, advocates, and survivors. "My name is Madison Reeves," she began. "6 years ago, I discovered my husband was having an affair with my sister. The shock triggered a miscarriage. My family sided with them. When I tried to fight back, my evidence was stolen and my lawyer was threatened. I was left with nothing." The room was silent. "But I was also pregnant with twins. Lost one, kept one. I made a choice that day. I tore up my pregnancy test and got on a bus to Montana with $800. I worked at a truck stop while pregnant. I had my son alone because I had no one else." She paused, let the weight sink in. "I'm here today to advocate for the Survivors Access to Justice Act. This bill would provide federal funding for legal aid organizations serving domestic violence survivors. It would ensure every woman, regardless of income, has access to an attorney when leaving an abusive situation." She held up the photo of her torn pregnancy test. "This test represents a choice I made when I thought I had no options. I tore it up because I was afraid of losing my baby to a man who'd destroyed my life." She set it down. "But here's what I learned. Leaving is terrifying. Rebuilding is exhausting. But it's possible. And it becomes more possible when we build systems that support survivors." She stepped from the podium. "I was lucky. I had people who helped me. Not everyone has that luck. So we need to build it into the system. We need to make survival possible for everyone." Through tears, I signed divorce papers. Through fear, I tore up a pregnancy test. Through desperation, I left everything. 6 years later, I've helped over 1,000 women do the same thing." She smiled. "That's what this bill does. It gives women the tools to leave, the support to rebuild, the resources to protect their children. It saves lives. Please support this bill." The room erupted in applause. After the hearing, messages flooded in. From Victor, "The bill's going to pass." From Catherine, "Your father would be proud." From Emma, "Baby Madison and I watched you. You're changing the world." On the flight home, an older woman recognized her. 40 years ago, I left my husband with 2 kids and $300. The woman said, eyes filling with tears. There were no shelters then, no legal aid. I lived in my car for 6 months. What you're doing, making it easier for women today, that's everything. Thank you. You fought for yourself, Madison said gently. You survived. That's incredible. We're survivors, the woman said. Warriors. Yes, we are. When Madison landed in Billings, Jackson ran to her. Mom, we watched you on TV talking to important people. Did you understand what I was talking about? You were helping mamas who are sad, Jackson said seriously. Making them happy again. That's exactly right. That evening, Carolyn called. Madison, I watched your testimony. You were magnificent. I'm so proud of you. They talked about Jackson's upcoming visit, about Sophia, about Caroline's therapy. The relationship was healing, slowly. They were trying. The next morning, 3 women waited outside Madison's office, all needing help. By noon, all 3 families were safe, cases opened, hope restored. Around 4 p.m., a courier delivered an envelope. The Survivors Access to Justice Act had passed the committee vote. It was heading to the full Senate. Madison cried at her desk. The bill was going to become law. They'd be able to help so many more women. That evening, she visited Ruth's grave. The diner owner who'd given her that first job had died the previous year. "The bill's going to pass, Ruth," Madison said quietly. "Everything we talked about, it's happening." She told Ruth about Jackson starting first grade, about the foundation's growth, about all the women they had helped. "Thank you for giving me a chance when I had nothing. I'm trying to pass it forward." At home, Jackson showed her his homework. "I'm writing about my hero. Can you read it?" "My hero is my mom. She helps people who are sad and makes them happy. She works really hard and loves me so much. When she was sad a long time ago, she was brave, and now she helps other people be brave." Madison hugged him tight, tears streaming. That night, she hung the framed pregnancy test on her home office wall, a reminder that you can survive the worst day of your life. You can rebuild from nothing. You can turn pain into purpose. Through tears, she'd signing the papers. Through pain, she'd torn up the test. Through fear, she'd left. 6 years later, she was still standing, still fighting, still helping others rise. And that was everything. 2 years after the trial, Madison stood before Congress again. The Survivors Access to Justice Act was law now, funding legal aid organizations nationwide. Today, she was testifying about its impact. 2 years ago, I stood here and told you about tearing up my pregnancy test and fleeing to Montana with $800, Madison said. Today, I'm here to report that the act has helped over 50,000 women access legal representation. 50,000 women who, like me, would have had nowhere to turn. She showed statistics. Domestic violence deaths down in states with funded programs. Children kept safely with protective parents. Economic stability for survivors increasing. This law saves lives, Madison concluded. I know because I see it every day in my foundation. Women who would have stayed in dangerous situations now have options. Children who would have witnessed violence are safe. That's what this investment achieves. After the testimony, she met with legislators expanding the program. Then she flew home to Montana. At the airport, Jackson waited with Diane. He was 7 now, losing teeth, growing too fast. "Mom, did you tell them about our foundation?" "I did, baby, and they're going to help us help even more people." At home that evening, Madison's phone rang. Ashley. They'd been rebuilding their relationship slowly. Ashley had completed therapy, was raising Sophia in Florida, working as a counselor for young women in abusive relationships. "Maddie, I wanted to tell you something," Ashley said. "Sophia asked about Jackson today. She wants to meet him, and I think I'm ready, if you are." Madison looked at Jackson doing homework at the kitchen table. "Let me talk to him," Madison said. "See how he feels about meeting his cousin." "Thank you for even considering it," Ashley said. "I know I don't deserve—" "You're trying," Madison interrupted. "You're doing the work. That matters." After hanging up, Madison sat with Jackson. "Remember how I told you that you have a cousin named Sophia?" Madison asked. Jackson nodded. "The one in Florida. She wants to meet you, and her mama, my sister Ashley, wants us to visit. How would you feel about that?" Jackson thought seriously. "Will they be nice to you?" Madison's heart squeezed. "Yes, baby, they will." "Okay then, I want to meet my cousin." The next day at the foundation, Madison met with her team. They were opening 2 new offices, hiring more staff, expanding services. The inheritance from her father and the settlement from Ethan's firm had made it all possible. "We're helping an average of 30 new families per week now," her director of operations reported. "Wait times are down to 48 hours for emergency cases." "That's incredible," Madison said. 2 years ago, we were helping 10 families a month." That evening, a young woman appeared at the closing time. No appointment, desperate, pregnant, scared. The same story Madison had heard hundreds of times. Madison brought her in, showed her the framed pregnancy test, told her story one more time. "You don't have to tear anything up," Madison said. "Not the test, not your future, not yourself. You're not alone anymore." The woman cried with relief. Another life saved, another future protected. Walking home that night, Madison passed a billboard advertising her foundation. The Reeves Foundation, because every survivor deserves a fighter. She smiled. 6 years ago, she'd been the one needing a fighter. Now she was the fighter for others. At home, She tucked Jackson into bed. Mom, my teacher said you're famous, Jackson said sleepily. Not famous, baby. Just trying to help people. I want to help people too when I grow up. You already do, just by being kind. After he fell asleep, Madison sat at her desk and opened her laptop. Her memoir was finished, scheduled for publication next month. Through Tears, a Survivor's Story. The final line read, "Through tears, I signed the divorce papers. Through pain, I tore up the pregnancy test. Through fear, I left everything behind. 6 years later, I discovered the truth. You don't just survive leaving. You discover who you really are. And sometimes who you really are is so much stronger than who you thought you had to be." Madison closed the laptop and looked around her home. Not fancy, but filled with love. Photos of Jackson, certificates from the foundation, thank you notes from women she'd helped. This was her life now, built from nothing, created from the ashes of her worst day. She'd torn up a pregnancy test thinking it was the end. It was the beginning. Through tears, she'd signed. Through pain, she'd torn. Through fear, she'd left. 6 years later, she hadn't just survived, she'd risen. And she was helping others rise too. One woman at a time, one family at a time, one future at a time. That was the legacy. That was the victory. That was everything.